My name is Isabella Foster, and I'm 31. For as long as I can remember, I've been the family's invisible bank, the silent caretaker, the one whose sacrifices were expected but never acknowledged. My parents' house sat a mere 10 minutes from mine. Small bricks, polite curtains, the kind of home that seemed cozy until you realized it was also a stage, and I was perpetually cast as the underappreciated daughter. I had bought my mother a house years ago, paid every bill, ensured the lights stayed on, the fridge stayed full, and that she never had to choose between comfort and dignity. My younger cousins streamed their shows without ever thinking of the electricity costs. I had handled everything, quietly, without complaint, or at least I thought I had. That Saturday, I arrived at a family gathering, hoping for civility, maybe even a rare smile. Instead, my mother's words cut through the chatter like knives. "You give us nothing but headaches," she declared, eyes locked on mine. A hush fell across the room. My brother Charles leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. My cousins suddenly discovered the magic of their phones. Even my aunt and uncle, who had once pretended to notice me, avoided my gaze. No one defended me, not a word. I clenched my hands under the table, forcing my face to remain neutral. I couldn't let them see me break. "That's not fair, Mom," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "I pay for everything, this house, the bills, the food, and you never let us forget it." She snapped, cutting me off. "You act like you're doing us a favor. A real daughter wouldn't keep score." I swallowed hard, letting my gaze drift over the room. Charles didn't flinch. My cousins stayed glued to their phones. Silence wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I took a deep breath. "Okay," I said. My mother frowned. "Okay, what?" she demanded. I stood, pushing my chair back. "If my help is such a burden, then I won't burden you anymore." The room tensed. My mother's lips parted, clearly expecting me to argue, to beg for a scrap of appreciation. But I was done begging, done paying for a family that treated me as if I were nothing. "I'm done paying for this house," I said, voice firm. "I'm done covering your bills. I'm done funding this entire family while being treated like an outsider." Charles cleared his throat awkwardly, but I didn't wait for him. "You all sat here and let her say that to me," I continued, turning to the room. "You let her pretend I'm nothing but a nuisance. So fine. Let's see how you do without me." I grabbed my purse and turned for the door. Panic prickled at the edges of my confidence, but I pushed it down. I walked out of that dining room with my head held high, yet my hands shook and my breath came in short bursts. For the first time in years, I had set a boundary. I expected the backlash to hit immediately. My phone buzzed almost at once. "Mom, come back inside. You're overreacting." "Isabella, what are you doing? You can't just walk out like that." Charles. I turned the phone off and drove away. The following days were a study in silence. No calls, no texts, just the quiet hum of my apartment, a stark contrast to the constant demands of my family. It felt eerie, almost like the calm before a storm. Then the messages began to trickle in. First guilt, then rage. "Mom is crying. Do you really want to do this to her?" "Honey, families have disagreements, but cutting everyone off isn't the answer. Let's talk." I ignored them all. When the tone shifted to anger, it was almost comical. "You're so selfish. You think money makes you better than us." My mother's words still echoing. I let out a humorless laugh and tossed my phone onto the bed. Then came a knock at my door. It was Charles, arms crossed, face twisted in irritation. "You've made your point," he said. "Now stop being dramatic and fix this." I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "Fix what?" "You know what?" he snapped. "Mom's losing her mind. The bills are stacking up and you just walk away?" I tilted my head. "Why is that my problem?" His jaw tightened. "Because you're the one who always takes care of it, and maybe that's the problem." I raised an eyebrow. "I make more than all of you." He shot back frustrated. "It's not the same." Ah, there it was. The truth behind the entitlement. Just because I earned more money didn't mean I owed them anything. "I bought that house for Mom," I said, voice calm but icy. "I've covered every bill, every grocery trip, every emergency, and instead of gratitude, I get told I do nothing but give headaches." Charles exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "She didn't mean that. She was upset." "No," I said firmly. "She meant it. And the worst part? No one defended me, not even you." For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt. "You don't get it," he muttered. "Mom's scared. She doesn't know how to handle things without you." "Then maybe she should have thought about that before humiliating me in front of the whole family," I said, stepping back inside. "I'm done, Charles. Figure it out." I closed the door behind me. The following week, chaos erupted. Mom called relatives, spinning her version of events. She abandoned us. She's punishing me. Some took her side. Others began noticing cracks in her perfect victim act. Aunt Lisa, one of Mom's fiercest defenders, began asking questions. Cousin Rachel whispered to me the truth about Charles paying Mom a mere $100 a month. I realized something profound. My family had never needed me. They had needed my money. By the end of that week, I felt a strange mixture of relief and hollow emptiness. For the first time, I wasn't their caretaker. I wasn't their invisible servant. I was just me. And the freedom, though terrifying, felt like breathing after being submerged underwater for decades. The days after I walked away felt surreal. The apartment, once quiet but never peaceful, now hummed with an unfamiliar calm. No urgent calls, no incessant requests for money, no sideways glances of expectation. It was my space, my rules, my life, or at least the beginning of it. But freedom had its own price. My phone buzzed occasionally, not with apologies, but with attempts at guilt. Mom is crying again. Can you just help a little? Isabella, please, you can't just abandon your family like this. I ignored them. I had done my part for years, and nothing had changed. If anything, my absence exposed truths long buried. It started small. Cousin Rachel sent a message one afternoon. Isabella, did you know how much Charles was actually paying Mom for rent? It's $100 a month. I nearly dropped my phone. $100. For everything I had been covering for years. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, emergencies. I had been the family's invisible safety net, the one they leaned on without gratitude, while Charles quietly contributed a fraction of what I had spent. And Mom had known. Of course she had. The pieces clicked into place. The carefully cultivated image of struggle, the public pleas for my help, the dramatic sighs and exaggerated crises. It had all been theater, a way to guilt me into submission. The truth had been there all along. I just hadn't allowed myself to see it clearly. That evening, I drove to the house for the first time in weeks. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing with confrontation, with demands for honesty, for acknowledgement, for a sliver of respect. I stepped into the kitchen. Mom's face twisted, expecting tears, apologies, begging. Charles leaned casually against the counter, arms crossed, smugness plastered across his features. He didn't expect me to challenge him. I want to make something clear, I said, voice calm but firm. I am never paying for anything in this house again. Mom scoffed. Oh, please, we all know you'll come crawling back. Charles smirked. Yeah, you're not going to let Mom suffer. We all know that. I tilted my head, measuring him. How much are you paying, Charles? The smirk faltered. What do you mean? You heard me, I said, stepping closer. I've been hearing some interesting things, like how you're giving Mom a whole $100 a month. Is that true? Charles stiffened. Mom's eyes widened, a fraction of panic flashing before she recovered her mask. Who told you that? She demanded. Does it matter? I replied coolly. You've been telling the whole family you're struggling, that you can't pay for rent, that Isabella abandoned you. Meanwhile, Charles is giving you pocket change while you buy gold bracelets and go out to brunch. The air thickened. Silence stretched between us like a taut rope. Charles's jaw tightened, Mom's mask faltered, and for the first time I felt a flicker of satisfaction. You've never planned for a future without me paying everything, I said quietly, and now you're realizing that was a mistake, but it's not my mistake to fix. Mom's breath hitched slightly. For a brief second I thought she might cry, but instead her voice hardened. Fine. If you want to be heartless, then don't expect to be welcomed back when you finally come to your senses. I exhaled slowly. I won't. For years, I had been the family's safety net, the invisible labor that made their comfortable lives possible, and for years, no one had acknowledged it. Now, the truth was out. My mother had no plan, no contingency, no respect for me as her daughter, and for the first time, that didn't matter. Returning home that night, I sat in silence, letting the enormity of what had just happened sink in. I realized something important. Their panic, their scrambling, their lies, they had never been about survival. They had been about control. And control was no longer mine to give them. The cracks I had suspected were widening. Aunt Lisa, one of Mom's fiercest defenders, began questioning things aloud. Wait, Isabella, you've been paying for everything all this time? She asked, astonished. That's not fair. Cousin Rachel was more blunt. She didn't just help, she funded everything. And you all let her be treated like dirt? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the room of my own apartment reflect back to me the truth. The family had thrived on my sacrifices. Without me, the facade of hardship cracked. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept without the weight of expectations crushing me. But the relief was tempered by awareness. My family would fight, manipulate, and guilt me endlessly. They always had, and this was just the beginning. Still, there was a quiet thrill in it. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was beginning to live. And that, I knew, was the most dangerous thing for them. Weeks passed, and the silence from my family stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. From the outside, they looked composed, but I knew better. I was no longer their safety net, and without me, the cracks in their carefully constructed lives began to show. I kept my life quiet but full, working, socializing, reclaiming the years I'd spent buried under other people's demands. Meanwhile, the family's panic unfolded in real time, filtered to me through texts, messages, and occasional updates from cousin Rachel, my quiet ally. "Charles is losing it," she wrote one afternoon. "Mom's furious. She's telling everyone you abandoned her, but she's still expecting him to cover everything. He can barely handle it." I smirked. That was the world I had lived in for decades. The more I gave, the more they demanded, all while pretending I was the villain. And now, for the first time, I watched them scramble without me. Powerless. Charles, once indifferent to the struggles I'd silently managed, was learning firsthand the weight I had carried. Bills, responsibilities, the constant need to anticipate every crisis, they were all his now. I didn't feel vindictive. It was simply the natural order finally correcting itself. But I wasn't completely removed. I watched quietly, savoring my life while witnessing their unraveling. Mom's social media, once filled with casual posts about her hardship, became inconsistent, often showing luxury brunches and new jewelry while still lamenting her financial ruin. Aunt Lisa, a steadfast defender of Mom, began asking questions that couldn't be ignored. "Wait, Isabella's been paying for everything?" she muttered. "For years?" Other relatives began noticing the contradictions. Charles going on weekend trips, Mom shopping freely, yet claiming desperation to anyone who would listen. The truth was breaking through the facade. My sacrifices had always been the backbone of their comfortable lives, and without me, they couldn't maintain the illusion. One evening, as I sat at a small cafe, sipping a latte and watching the city lights blur in the rain, my phone buzzed. It was Charles. "Hey, can we talk?" I hesitated but answered. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, vulnerable, almost human. "I screwed up," he said. "I should have had your back at that dinner. I didn't say anything, and I let them treat you like you were nothing. I didn't realize how much you were carrying." I stayed silent, letting him continue. "I always thought you'd be there, that no matter what, you'd cover everything. And when you walked away, I had to step up, and I realized just how much you did." His words weren't guilt. They were acknowledgement. For the first time in years, no manipulation, no expectations, no subtle pressure, just honesty. I exhaled slowly, gripping my coffee cup tighter. "And now?" I asked quietly. Now I get it. I see it. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I just needed you to know." I nodded, letting the weight of those words sink in. Years of silent labor, of constant responsibility, were finally recognized, even if belatedly. But I wasn't going back. I wouldn't allow the family to revert to old patterns. Not this time. Meanwhile, the outside world continued to feel expansive, full of possibility. I booked a weekend trip to the mountains, hiked trails I'd always admired, but never had the time or freedom to explore. I decorated my apartment with objects that reflected me, warm, bold, and unapologetic. I laughed with friends late into the night, no longer calculating every expense to account for someone else's comfort. And yet I remained aware. My mother's manipulations were subtle and ongoing, a shadow that never fully disappeared. She had no plan, no real struggle, and yet she clung to the narrative of victimhood, hoping to draw me back. But the cracks in her story were widening, and more relatives began to notice. Aunt Lisa began questioning every claim, comparing Isabella's sacrifices to Mom's alleged struggles. Cousin Rachel continued to update me on Charles's frustration, now visible to everyone in the family. The more they tried to maintain control through guilt, the more obvious it became that Isabella had been the one holding the entire household together. Freedom, I realized, was not just absence from responsibility, it was clarity. And clarity revealed what I had always known. The family thrived on my labor, my money, my time, and they had no intention of seeing that labor as anything more than expected. That realization was empowering, and it was dangerous for them, because I was done. 3 months had passed since I walked away from my family's expectations. In that time, I had rediscovered myself in ways I hadn't imagined possible. My apartment reflected me, not their needs, not their debts, not their crises. I laughed freely, traveled without calculating the cost of every indulgence, and learned what it felt like to live solely for myself. And yet the past never fully let go. My mother's attempts at manipulation didn't cease. Occasional calls, always dripping with guilt. Occasional messages, always wrapped in accusations. But the cracks in her armor were now visible to everyone, even her staunchest supporters. Aunt Lisa had started questioning her, softly at first, then more openly. Wait, Isabella's been paying for everything? For years? She asked in disbelief. Others too began noticing how Charles was struggling under the burden that I had once carried effortlessly. Then came the phone call that changed the dynamics entirely. It was late, and I was sitting on my balcony, the city lights reflecting in a glass of wine. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. Hello? I answered cautiously. You think you're better than us now, my mother spat, venom thinly veiled as accusation. You've embarrassed this family. Everyone knows what you did. I see, I said calmly, leaning back. My voice was steady, measured. And what exactly did I do? You left me to suffer, she barked. I exhaled slowly, letting the cool night air wash over me. Suffer? You mean like how I worked tirelessly for years to keep you comfortable? Like how I paid for everything while you judged me? There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear her hesitation. You think you don't need me? She said quietly, almost a whisper. I know I don't need you, I replied firmly. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? Her laughter, sharp and brittle, came through the line. You'll be back. One day you'll realize family is all you have, and when that day comes, don't expect me to be waiting with open arms. I won't, I said simply. Then I hung up. It was the first time in my life I had refused to be drawn back into their web. The realization hit me fully. I was finally untethered. No one could manipulate me. No one could guilt me. I had stepped out of a cage I hadn't known I was locked in, and I was breathing freely for the first time in decades. Weeks later, Charles called. His voice carried a mix of relief and lingering guilt. I should have had your back at the family dinner, he admitted. I didn't. I thought you'd always be there, and I didn't understand what you were doing for us all these years. I was a crappy brother. I listened, letting the words sink in. They weren't demands, weren't manipulations, just honesty, just acknowledgement. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Life finally felt expansive. I traveled to Italy, sat in a small cafe in Rome, letting the warm sun fill me. I hiked trails in the mountains I had never thought I'd see. I bought new clothes without a second thought. I laughed late into the night with friends. For the first time, I lived fully for myself. Months rolled into a year. Calls from Mom remained sporadic. Always attempts at guilt, always attempts at control. I ignored them all. Charles and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. Trust had to be earned, and this time it would be earned honestly, without expectation. And in the quiet moments, I reflected on what freedom really meant. Not just absence from financial or emotional labor, but absence from fear, absence from manipulation, absence from the constant tally of expectations. I wasn't merely surviving anymore, I was thriving. I took a deep breath, letting the salty air of a distant beach fill my lungs. The waves rolled in, constant and indifferent. And in their rhythm, I recognized a truth I had long denied. I was free, and I would never go back. No more being the family's bank. No more being the scapegoat. No more living a life sacrificed for others. For the first time, the world felt like mine, fully, unapologetically mine. A year had passed since I drew the line and refused to be my family's unpaid caretaker. The freedom I had gained wasn't just a break from financial strain. It was a reclaiming of myself, my time, my choices. Each morning, I woke without the familiar weight of expectation pressing on my chest. Each evening, I returned to an apartment that reflected my life, my tastes, my energy. I had moved to a new city, far from the constant reminders of what I had endured. My career flourished, my friendships deepened, and Charles and I rebuilt a relationship grounded in honesty and mutual respect. He had learned, slowly and painfully, what it meant to step up without relying on someone else to carry the burdens of others. Mom tried, occasionally, to pull me back into the old dynamics. Calls laced with guilt, pleas thinly veiled as concern, attempts to paint me as ungrateful. I didn't answer, not anymore. Her manipulation had lost its power over me. I had seen the cracks in her story. I had watched her scramble when I finally stepped away. I knew the truth, and it no longer belonged to her. Family gatherings continued without me, but I no longer felt excluded. I was free from judgment, free from calculation, free from the invisible ledger of favors owed and grudges kept. Aunt Lisa and Cousin Rachel kept me updated when they could, sharing quiet revelations about how Mom and Charles were adjusting to life without my constant support. They didn't need me to intervene. The consequences were clear, and the truth was emerging naturally. I traveled more than I ever had before. Rome, the mountains, a quiet beach town I stumbled upon one summer. All places that reminded me how vast the world was, how much life I had deferred for the sake of obligations that weren't mine to bear. I filled my apartment with books, art, and memories of my own making. I hosted dinners, laughter echoing freely without the tension I had once carried like a shadow. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood on my balcony, glass of wine in hand, letting the warm breeze wash over me. For the first time in decades, I understood what it meant to be truly untethered. Not reckless, not indifferent, but entirely in control of my own life. Charles called that night. Our conversation was easy, calm, grounded. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people reconnecting, not because they needed each other to maintain a balance, but because they wanted each other in their lives. And I knew deeply that nothing my mother or anyone else could say or do would ever pull me back into that cage. The lessons had been harsh, but the outcome was clear. I belonged to myself first, always. I took a long breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs, and smiled. I was free. Free to make mistakes, free to celebrate victories, free to live fully, unapologetically. The years of silent labor, invisible sacrifice, and relentless expectation had forged a resilience I had never known I possessed. The past no longer controlled me. The family I had once carried on my shoulders was learning, slowly and painfully, that I was no longer their safety net. And I, in turn, was learning the boundless joy of life lived for oneself. I raised my glass to the night, to the waves, to the wind, to freedom, to me.